The first question, Adam, is your preference In-N-Out or Five Guys?
Man, Five Guys is my initial answer because the burgers are so good and they just go nuts on the fries, I gotta say.
That's true.
My checkbook doesn't love when I go to Five Guys. It's a sore spot in my marriage because my wife prefers In-N-Out. So thank you for opening up a really sore spot right out the gate.
Yeah, we're digging in hard in this podcast.
Yeah, so Five Guys, if I have to be honest, although I love In-N-Out, don't get me wrong, I'll take In-N-Out any day of the week.
Yeah, In-N-Out's
you know what I mean?
delicious, yeah.
Right? It's great.
Yeah, of course.
I don't want to knock it.
No.
If you have to pick one, right?
These are two good choices.
Right, exactly.
That's what makes this a great question.
Yes.
You can't really be that wrong.
Welcome to 10 Questions with 10 Pastors. Brought to you by Gateway Seminary. With your host, Tyler Sanders.
With us today is Adam Christman. He's senior pastor at First Baptist Church in Clairemont, and that would be Clairemont outside of La Jolla, San Diego, in California.
That's correct.
Adam earned an MDiv and his PhD from then Golden Gate, now Gateway. Wait, did you get your PhD? That would have been Gateway.
I got one degree under Golden Gate and another degree under Gateway, so that was fun.
Do you still have your Golden Gate
I sure
diploma?
do. It's on my wall.
Yeah, so do I. I haven't switched mine out yet. That's great. Okay, well, that was our first question. I told you that was the toughest one. That's the most gotcha one. And maybe it did get you with your wife. My next question is, what are you reading right now?
I like to rotate between multiple books, so I take a little bit during the week to read parts of different things. So I'm reading, I think it's Growing Up by Robbie Gallaty. I'm rereading Gentle and Lowly with my church staff by Dane Ortland.
I think that one's come up on the podcast previously.
And then I'm reading a little bit of the sermons of C.H. Spurgeon. That's everything I've opened right now. I got other books that are in the pile, but I haven't started reading them.
So when you say you do that in rotation, you're kind of switching between all those books
during the week. Yeah. So one day I'll read some from this, and then a different day I'll read some from that.
Nice.
I don't do one book start to finish before I start another one.
Yeah. It's
because they're in different areas of life. So like the Gallaty book is about discipleship. The Gentle and Lowly is about the heart of Christ and who he is. And I'm reading through that with my staff as a way to just connect with them and lead them in a way that I can in this. I'm new to this church. And so I'm just trying to find a simple, basic way to lead them in this time where I don't know them super well yet. I've only been there just a handful of months. And then something like the sermons of C.H. Spurgeon is to edify my soul and then maybe to glean something that I could use in my own preaching as well,
Right.
So.
Now, speaking of church, when you're preparing big picture sermons, how are you outlining themes? How are you approaching big series if you do that? What's your approach?
So, I love verse by verse through a book, but one of the things that sticks with me in my planning is I don't want to just do it verse by verse and stay there to the detriment of bringing new first-time guests on board with what the church is doing. So I basically have two books going and until I finish them, and then in between at certain points we will pivot to a limited series where we do something else as a kind of change of pace, another on-ramp for first-time guests. And I can kind of build into the life of the church. Hey, invite your guests. They're starting a new series next week sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, for example, when I started at this church, I began a verse-by-verse series through Matthew and preached that for a while, and then pivoted to a verse-by-verse series through Genesis. And then right now I am in the midst of a topical series, which is the weirdest sermon series I've ever heard of. I'm doing the frame of this series is movie monsters.
Yeah.
Vampires, werewolves.
Okay.
Godzilla.
Yeah.
Nonsense like that. Utter nonsense, I totally admit. But we're in October, and I'm trying to get first-time guests who've never heard the gospel.
Right.
To hear the gospel.
Yeah.
And we know that this is a huge cultural thing at this point in our country. We know that A lot of families spend more money on Halloween than they spend on Christmas at this point, you know, in the 21st century. And I'm just trying to connect with people in ways that are authentic to who I am, you know. And for me, I like these cheesy monster movies. I watch the Bela Lugosi 1931 Dracula movie every year.
Yeah,
I do. I'm a huge nerd, and I just gonna own it.
Is that like a Halloween tradition? Or
Yeah,
just,
sometime in October, I'm gonna try to fit it in, and we've watched that.
Yeah.
You know, I like those old classic cheesy ones. I like the more modern cheesy ones as well, like from the 60s and stuff. You know, like Godzilla movies and nonsense like that.
Yeah.
And so it just gives me a chance of. So for this particular series, the point is to preach the gospel.
Yeah.
In a direct and simple way through a particular passage that happens to connect with one of these themes that we're going with. So this last Sunday, I preached Galatians 6, 7 through 9 about reaping and sowing, and how if you sow to the flesh, you will reap destruction. As you sow to the spirit, you will reap eternal life. And the movie monster I connected with that was Godzilla, because the whole theme of those movies is very much the negative side of that, where the hubris aspect of all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so my thought, big picture wise, is create on-ramps for new people. I want to go verse by verse because I want to be able to deliver the whole counsel of God to people. It helps me to get them the whole big picture of a book without giving me an easy out on perhaps a difficult passage,
a tricky one.
or something hard to say to that particular culture or those people or whatever. It doesn't let me out. But doing it in this way allows those on-ramps, allows me to speak on other topics at various points through the year.
Yeah.
You know, as Baptists, we maybe sometimes kind of poo-poo the idea of a church calendar, but we all know that we all have a church calendar. We all preach a Christmas series.
That's right.
We all preach on the family at some point. We all preach on tithing at some point. We all preach on this or that or the other thing. Let's just own it and just say, okay, we have a church calendar that we prefer, but we don't want to be beholden to somebody else's church calendar. We're doing ours.
Yeah.
So I think that's fair. I think that's okay.
Yeah.
In terms of, I'm a Baptist, this is what I do. Here we go.
That's right.
Like I have a Christmas series coming up.
Of course.
And I'm just going to acknowledge that, that's part of our church calendar. We have a church, we're a Baptist church calendar. We're not Catholics, we're not Anglicans, but we got a church calendar.
Yeah.
And so you fit that stuff in. So anyway, here and there between the other kind of topical series, like this weird one in October, the Christmas one, we'll come back to those other verse by verse series and continue moving forward.
Working through those books.
So in Matthew, I worked from chapter 1, verse 1 through the end of chapter 4 of Matthew. And then when we get back, we're going to be in the Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to be in the Sermon on the Mount for a couple of weeks before we pivot to this Advent Christmas series.
Yeah.
And then we'll do Seek Ye First the Kingdom of God as a whole sermon series for about 3 weeks. And then we're going to come back to Matthew. And so we're going to keep coming back to it over the course of time.
Yeah.
You know, so that's basically my thought and structure there.
So then the next question is more on the micro level. How do you go like week to week? And that may change. It kind of sounds like, I would assume it would. If you're, when you're going verse by verse, your preparation is probably different than a movie monster series, right?
Right, where you're in different places. That's true. Because in October right now, I'm in all kinds of different books. I'm in Romans, I'm in Galatians, I'm in Corinthians. Like, that's true. So for the verse by verse stuff, you got to work really hard at really getting a big picture understanding of your book before you start preaching that book, So for me, like I worked hard on Matthew and on Genesis to kind of get myself into a place where I was ready to connect any single piece to the whole of whatever that book is doing. And then whatever that book does in the midst of the biblical canon, you know. But then when you come to these more isolated series, I spend time refreshing myself on the study of that book and then working hard to connect that particular piece to its surrounding context.
Right.
And then preaching that.
Right.
And so that's essentially how that works. For me, I do a lot of work. When I do my sermon calendar prep, I do a lot of work for that week or two, pouring into the prep. So, for example, at this point, I am totally ready in terms of a sermon brief, like that, the outline, the main point, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm totally ready through Father's Day of next year.
Oh, wow.
That's all ready.
Okay.
And so week to week, how that looks for me is for the verse by verse stuff, like Matthew and Genesis right now for me, that stuff is a little easier in a sense because I've done so much heavy lifting in terms of the book, the whole book, and the sermon brief prep. And so when I come to it, it's really a lot more diving deep into the passage itself, connecting it to its surrounding context, and really finding the best way to communicate what's here. You know.
Well, this is a bonus question.
Sure.
This isn't one of the 10.
Oh no.
Are you writing like a full manuscript?
No, I do not write full manuscripts.
Okay.
I used to. When I was first learning how to preach, I manuscripted everything. I had page after page of notes because I wanted it in a bigger font that I could make sure to read while I'm at the pulpit. But at this point, I try to take one piece of paper with me up to the pulpit so that everything is on one sheet. There's no turning pages. There's no stapling it. There's no pieces getting lost. There's none of that stuff.
Right. No order mess ups.
So I work really, really hard during the week leading up to here's the way it works. I actually work really hard on next week's sermon the week before it happens. So when I get done with the convention, for example, tomorrow, I'm going to be working on not this Sunday's sermon as much as I'm going to be working on the following Sunday's sermon. Right. Because this Sunday's sermon is ready.
It's ready.
I was inspired by, I think it was Derwin Gray talked about his sermon prep is that he finishes his sermon by noon on Monday so that he has the rest of the week for it to percolate and for him to reconsider things in a fresher way that he could communicate. And I was challenged by that because I'm used to finish it by Thursday, get it done by Thursday. That was used to be my habit. And the stress and you stay late and then, your wife's calling you like, are you ever coming home? And I'm like, oh, the sermon's not done.
You got to finish it.
So I'm putting more work into it up front so that when the week is coming, actually I'm largely done with it. You know what I mean? And I'm just fine tuning it at that point. So that's essentially how that works. During the week, leading up to the actual Sunday sermon, I'll go back over things like the Greek or the Hebrew to just kind of refine again, like, did I really get that right on how to understand that word or phrase or how they connect together? And I might freshen up a couple of illustrations where I go, you know what, I'm gonna swap. That one's not working. I'm not committed to that anymore. And I'll take that one out, and then I'll think through what's a better illustration to make that point. And so what I print from my computer is one thing, and then during the week as I tweak it, I do handwritten notes in the margins around that outline where I just jot it in. And so like sometimes that one sheet is very densely packed with text, that I've handwritten around the printed stuff.
Right. Okay. Now, what's the most difficult passage you've preached on?
I don't know how to answer that off the top of my head.
Okay.
Definitely some of the hardest ones are the more direct obedience related passages because I think it's hard to balance preaching in a regular Sunday service where you've got people who've been Christians for 60 years. Who believe Jesus, follow Jesus, read their Bible, do what they're supposed to do. Or at least in large part, and at the same time having a first-time guest who's literally never heard the gospel before.
Right.
How do you preach an obedience-centered passage to both people? Like, how do you provide a meal for both of them in your preaching? That's really difficult, in my opinion. I think that's probably one of the hardest things to do is to try to prepare content for everybody in the room. So...
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah. So I say that's a challenge. So, for example, I mentioned I preached Galatians 6 this most recent Sunday. That's very obedience-oriented, And so I had to build into the structure of the message a point where I communicated to the first-time hearers of the gospel and our first-time guests who... some of them come late, sometimes, and I have no idea where they are with the Lord. This might for them also be the first time they've ever heard the gospel, or maybe the 10,000th time. But just building in a point where I'm sure I can go home in clear conscience, knowing I preach specifically the gospel to them. and how it connects with what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And why what we were talking about really, why we do that as a result of Jesus' saving work and our new nature and all of those things that go along with it,
Yeah. So we focused a lot on preaching. And this may be an answer to the next question. What do you feel like is a sweet spot, and what's maybe a growing edge for you in terms of like roles or responsibilities as a pastor?
Okay. Sweet spot for me is probably trying to be in leadership in a one-on-one where I'm meeting with a team leader, I'm meeting with a staff member, and we're talking through what they've got on their plate, and I'm trying to give them guidance and direction and solve problems with them, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a sweet spot for me.
Okay.
I'd like to say preaching, but I'm not sure. Trying to stay humble. I don't it's hard to do that, so I don't know. And then as far as growing edges, that's definitely with, well, I don't know if I would say definitely now that I think about it, but trying to move groups of people when they are used to certain things, trying to move them to what's the next thing. It's not necessarily that where you're at is bad, but there's always a next step.
Right.
Like the Lord is not taking you home. He's got a mission for you to do still.
Yeah.
That means you have an active role to play in some sense.
Yeah.
I may not know what that is. I may never know what that is, but trying to help them not stay put, you know what I mean? In terms of mindset or what have you.
And is that about helping people kind of see what that next step is, what the vision is, or is it?
The hard part is helping them catch the vision as a group.
Okay.
And that's specifically what I'm thinking of. I don't know if I'm communicating it very well, but because when you're in a group of people and they're talking and they're used to each other because they've known each other for, 10 years or 20 years or something, and you're the newer guy. For me, I'm the brand new guy. I've been at this church, as I mentioned, less than a year.
Yeah.
They can get into this kind of unintentionally, I think. They're well-intentioned, but they can get into this kind of groupthink moment where they kind of lock up and go, but we've always done it this way, and that's just what we're going to do. And whereas when I'm individually one-on-one with them, it's much easier to communicate, don't you see the value of this? Or, you know what I mean? Like, let's say this church has always done event XYZ, and at this point, the only people that really ministers to are the people who've been around for 30 years.
Yeah.
And they love that because they always do that at that whatever that is.
Yeah.
But it appeals to literally no new people.
Sure, yeah.
Even new people in the same age category.
Yeah.
Just because that's not their tradition.
Right.
And so moving it maybe from a church function to a family function, or changing the church function in this way or that way so that we open a door for new people to get in on that tradition and be excited to be a part of that part of the life of the church.
Yeah. So take this next one as seriously or not seriously as you want. My answer would not be very serious.
Okay.
What's a specific swing and a miss you've had in ministry?
I have a very active sense of humor, I would say. And I don't preach to look funny or to be funny, but I use jokes in my sermons. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's been, I can't even count how many jokes that I've thrown out there that were absolutely the wrong call to make in that moment. Like, they didn't land. They weren't funny.
Yeah.
They didn't do anything for the people in the pews.
Yeah.
And I realized in the moment that was not what I should have done.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That is, like, without a doubt, I've misfired. And it's not that they were offensive jokes or anything like that. Like, they were above board, clean jokes. It's not that they were wrong in any sense in terms of their content.
Yeah.
It's that it didn't fit the moment. And what I needed to really do was keep the tone the same rather than divert into a joke and then come back.
Yeah.
And so I've absolutely done that more than once.
Yeah.
I've done that a couple of times where one person gave me a little pity laugh in like the back pew. And then I've had other times where the room is dead silent and I go, why did I do that? Why did I do that?
Time to get back on track.
Yeah.
All right. What's something that you think a pastor cannot learn in seminary?
Cannot learn in seminary. I think learning the actual, what it really feels like to take the long view in working towards the unity of a group, in making decisions and moving forward.
Okay.
So it's very important to me that the church make decisions together. We're a congregational style church. We're a congregational style convention.
Yeah.
And for us, we don't have a bishop or a pope or any single pastor who's going to tell everybody what to do and how to do it. And so for me, it's very important to work towards the unity before we pull the trigger on any decision.
Yeah.
I frequently use a metaphor that I heard, I don't know, decades ago from who knows who, but working so that all wheels of the cart face the same direction. And that can take so long.
Yeah.
I'm not sure people can really learn it in seminary, and I did not learn it in seminary.
Yeah.
I learned about it in seminary, certainly at an academic level.
Yeah.
I learned about it, but in terms of actually learning,
how you do it, the practice,
what does it feel like? What kind of patience do you need?
Yeah.
What do you tell yourself in the midst of, like, how are they still not getting it? Like, I've got these 2/3 of people get it, this 1/3 still doesn't. How do they, how do you talk to yourself and to the Lord when you express yourself to Him and you're going, this change is necessary. I know it's necessary. Like, we got to do this or what have you. And so you have to actually go through those things in real time.
Yeah.
Where you can learn that kind of submission to the people.
Yeah.
We are a congregational body, and I, as their pastor, even as someone who gives them leadership and direction, I must submit to them as well as we mutually submit.
There's got to be trust there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are going to do this together, or we're not doing it.
Yeah.
Is essentially what I would sum that up as.
Yeah. What's the opposite for this? Like, what's something that anyone going to seminary, they have to learn it? What's like that one thing you can't leave seminary without?
One thing, man, that's a good question. I mean, there's so many things that you can go through seminary for that are important and good to learn and that you frankly should learn. But to boil it down to one thing that you absolutely cannot miss if you're going to go to seminary and do that sort of thing. Since I'm not entirely sure, I'm gonna give you the answer that is the one I feel strongest about.
Okay.
Is that full openness about it right here? So here's my answer. Put a red flag on it if you want. But I think you absolutely have to learn to die to yourself in seminary. And one of the things that I learned in doing my work in the seminary was to die to myself again and again and again and again. Because I think when we have so many Christians online, lay people, pastors, whoever, who are such loudmouth braggarts, who are swinging clubs around at each other, dividing one brother from another. There's no dying to self there at all.
Yeah.
And it grieves me that so many of these people have gone through seminary for an MDiv or for one of the other various degrees that the seminaries offer. They've gone through an entire experience, educational experience, being exposed to leaders who taught them, this, that, and the other thing. And yet they did not seem to learn dying to self, which is a very crucial part of Christian theology and ethics.
Yeah.
And so since I have to pick one thing, I will pick that.
That's a great answer.
You have to learn to die to self while you're in seminary.
And that's not a class they offer.
Exactly.
There's not a class in that, but it's something,
it's an
kind
overall
of a
experience.
Yeah.
I learned that through the papers, through doing the work of reading the book that I didn't want to read alongside the book I did want to read.
Yeah.
And I learned that through my doctorate. That was the main thing I think I learned maybe in my doctorate. If you set aside the academic things that I did, and you talk about character and skills, one of the things that maybe the one thing I most learned through my doctorate work was dying to self.
Yeah.
Because when you've got pushback on your way of talking about that passage of scripture, or pushback on how you think that theological theme should be understood, or on how the church should be organized, or how ministry should happen, or how preaching should occur, or evangelistic strategies or whatever. When you get pushed and pushed and pushed again and again and again and again and again, and you accept that, not necessarily accepting that you're wrong, but accepting I got pushed because I might be wrong.
Right.
Let me now go back and examine whether or not I was wrong about that. Yeah. And incorporating, hopefully, Lord willing, if it's at all creditable, incorporating the criticisms and the pushbacks, where you can say, you know what? I think Tim Keller talks about this a lot, where he talks about when you receive criticism, look for however much of that is true and incorporate that into your life. Yeah. You know, even if it's 1% of what they said, you could still say, all right, well, but that's true. Yeah. So I'm not going to throw out the truth, even though the 99% is wrong. Yeah.
That's good.
So that's what I'd say.
I think that's a great answer. My final question for you. How did you meet Jesus?
I was raised in a Southern Baptist church. My father was a pastor before he died, and my mother was a journeyman with IMB, Foreign Mission Board at the time. Yeah. And so I went to church every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, like all that stuff, did all the things, and I thought I was Christian. Yeah. I went forward during VBS as after third grade, thought I was saved, but I was really doing it because everybody else was doing it. Sure. And got wet just like everybody else, right? Yeah. Went through the baptismal waters and thought I was good. Yeah. And then I proceeded to live the worst years of my life in terms of morality, two-facedness, like all the things the worst things I've done, I did in that stretch of time. And then after my 8th grade year of school, I went to a church camp at Janess Park, Christian camp. Okay. Had a great week at Centrifuge, and went home, told my mother all about it, and she was like, that's great. And then she went to bed, I thought. I got on the phone, and this is back in the days when we still had phones with cords, and so I'm tethered to the kitchen. Yeah. And I'm in the kitchen, and I'm cussing up a storm, and I'm nasty as all get out to this friend of mine. We're just talking, and I'm just being awful on the phone. And while on the phone, I turn around, and my mother's standing there with her arms crossed. And she heard, I don't know how much she heard, but she definitely heard what I was like, for real, in that moment. She caught the other face being shown. And I said to my friend on the phone, I said, dude, I got to go. And he said, okay. He didn't think anything of it. I hang up, and she said, you didn't learn anything at that camp, did you? Why did you go? Why did we spend that money? And she expressed her disappointment, and I felt grief in my heart that I disappointed her so bad. Yeah. And then she helped me understand in our conversation, she helped me understand, if I'm this disappointed with you, how much more is the Lord disappointed? Because he sees and hears everything. Yeah. And then she asked, are you really saved? Because a saved person, you know, and she launches into what a Christian lives like, or at least tries to. Yeah. And I realized in that moment, I absolutely did not ask forgiveness of my sins for real. I believe Jesus existed, but I believe that I was safe because I was good to my grandparents, and like, you know what I mean? I was good in all the right social circles, and then I could live where however I wanted everywhere else. Yeah. And so I thought I was a Christian because of that mess. And she helped me understand that that's absolutely not the case, and that I needed to repent for real. Yeah. And ask Jesus for real to save me of my sins. Yeah. And I did. And you know what? Like, in that moment, I was saved from the desire to drink any alcohol and to show off to my friends and be like be included in social circles to be cool. Yeah. Now I'm in like almost no social circles, so it works. But you know, I was really truly saved in that moment in the summer after my 8th grade year. Yeah. And you know, I've been as much a mess as anybody else since then, but that was where the trajectory began, where that's where Christ saved me, and that's the point where I started walking that path.
Yeah,
towards Him.
That's a great story, man.
So,
this one's for the moms.
That's right.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Adam. Thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thanks,
and,
Tyler.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Sounds good.